17 months after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, the House Select Committee in charge of investigating that attack is starting to show us and the American public its work with its first live televised hearing on Thursday. What did we learn that we didn't know before? That is an important question, and the short answer is a lot. We saw new footage of the violence from that day and new clues that point to deliberate planning and coordination by violent extremist groups like the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers. We're going to go deeper on that point later on in the show, but we also learned a whole lot more about what was happening in the White House in the lead up to the insurrection. Testimony from Donald Trump's lawyers, his attorney general, his son-in-law, and his daughter, all suggesting that Trump knew what he was doing and he knew it was wrong. For example, Trump knew that he had lost the election to Joe Biden. How do we know that? Because his own top data analyst came into the Oval Office and told him specifically, according to his campaign insider, Jason Miller.
I was in the Oval Office, and at some point in the conversation, Matt Oskowski, who is the lead data person, was brought on. And I remember he delivered to the president pretty blunt terms that he was going to lose.
All right, but Trump reportedly argued that his legal challenges over election fraud would change that result. The only problem, there was no such thing as election fraud, and the White House knew it. How do we know that? Because of committee testimony from a Trump lawyer tasked with finding that specific fraud, who told the chief of staff, Mark Meadows, he was coming up empty-handed.
I remember a call with Mr. Meadows, where Mr. Meadows was asking me what I was finding and if I was finding anything. And I remember sharing with him that we weren't finding anything that would be sufficient to change the results in any of the key states.
But according to last night's hearing, the flimsier of those election fraud claims, the flimsier they got, the harder Donald Trump leaned into them, even against the advice of his attorney general and advice that, Trump's own daughter, Ivanka, now says that she actually agreed with.
I made it clear I did not agree with the idea of saying the election was stolen and putting out this stuff, which I told the president was bull.
How did that affect your perspective about the election when Attorney General Barr made that statement?
It affected my perspective. I respect Attorney General Barr. So I accepted what he was saying.
But Donald Trump did not accept what the Attorney General said. In fact, he still doesn't. He responded to the hearings in a series of angry tweets, if you will. Sorry, not really tweets. I mean, posts or whatever they call them on his Twitter-like social media site called Truth Social. He writes, "It is, quote, a one-sided, totally partisan political witch hunt. The so-called rush on the Capitol was not caused by me. It was caused by a rigged and stolen election." Trump went on to call Bill Barr, quote, a weak and frightened attorney general because he didn't look hard enough for the non-existent election fraud, we might add. But last night's hearing also focused on Trump's enablers in Congress, like this guy, Pennsylvania Republican Scott Perry, who reportedly aided Trump in a failed plan to install a loyalist as acting attorney general, who would then use the Justice Department to challenge the election outcome. And Thursday, panel vice chair Liz Cheney dropped this bombshell.
As you will see, Representative Perry contacted the White House in the weeks after January 6th to seek a presidential pardon. Multiple other Republican congressmen also sought presidential pardons for their roles in attempting to overturn the 2020 election.
Multiple other Republicans. What a bombshell. But a spokesperson for Perry called that, quote, a ludicrous and soulless lie. But if the committee can prove this point, it raises an extremely important question. If you are not doing anything wrong, let alone illegal, what are you seeking a pardon from the president who may have asked you to do this for? All of this is just a little bit of what came out Thursday. But all of this is extremely important because it all suggests that Trump's inner circle, his most trusted advisors, his own daughter, knew what the rest of this country knew. They knew he had lost the election. They told him he had lost the election. They knew the election was legitimate, and they told him that. They knew that it was dangerous for the country, for Trump, and for themselves to pretend that the election was stolen. And yet Trump did it anyway. Let's parse all of this now with our panel of experts. Joining us now, MSNBC legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Barb McQuade. Also here with us, former GOP communications director Tara Setmayer, who now advises the Lincoln Project, as well as Danielle Moody, host of the Woke AF Daily podcast and co-host of Democracy-ish. It's great to have all of you with us. Barbara, I'd like to start with you. As a prosecutor, what did all of these details from these insider interviews on Thursday, or at least those that emerged on Thursday, tell you, and what is your big picture takeaway here?
Well, I think one of the really important things that was established during the hearing last night that was new were the repeated people who told Donald Trump that he lost the election. We had previously known about some of them. We knew about Brad Raffensperger in Georgia. We knew about William Barr. We knew about the 60 failed lawsuits where judges told them there was no fraud. But I think hearing it from these insiders, his data specialist, his campaign lawyers, the one who said there was no there, culminating with this video of William Barr saying very forcefully, these claims of fraud are BS. I think that's really important toward establishing that Donald Trump acted with a fraudulent intent. And big picture, these hearings are really just about to illuminate what happened, to document it for history, and to fill any gaps in the law that may be needed to be enacted by Congress. But going forward, whether this results in some sort of criminal referral or criminal prosecution by the Justice Department, that fraudulent intent is essential. It's the hardest thing to prove in any white-collar case. You have to prove that a person knew that what they were saying was wrong. And, to date, I think we had thought, well, there are a few instances that may have told most of us that there was no there. But now we know that Donald Trump actually knew this in November and December and yet continued to persist in this lie. I think that's some really important evidence toward putting together a potential criminal case against Donald Trump.
Tara, let me get your thoughts on what surprised you the most of all the things we heard from all those Republicans and all those insiders to the Trump world. What surprised you? What was your takeaway from last night?
Yeah, so I was surprised to see how many of them were honest about what took place, because in public, they were saying very different things, the Jason Millers of the world, and then also bringing in some of the inner circle Trump folks who we didn't know, like the Trump lawyer and some others, names that were not household names, saying that, but they were on the ground, on the front lines there, saying like, there is no there, this didn't happen. I also thought that was very compelling. And the fact that the committee right away went straight to the video depositions where there was no mincing of words was a very effective tool. Using Bill Barr, the attorney general, who's the top law enforcement official in the country at the time, as AG, saying this was BS, and he let Trump know that early on, I think set the tone for the legitimacy of what the committee was trying to demonstrate here. And also the fact that Liz Cheney didn't mince words concerning her thoughts on the illegality of what Trump had done. That, I think, is key. She used the word illegal many times, and I think that was for that audience of one, signaling to the Justice Department, hey, Merrick Garland, we're about to lay out a case here for you. We can't prosecute it, but you can, and we have the goods, the receipts, the evidence to show that there was illegal activity, and there was a grand conspiracy that started with the President of the United States.
Danielle, Committee Chairman Benny Thompson said that the people who justified the actions of the insurrectionists reminded him of voices back home in Mississippi that tried to justify slavery, and just racist violence in general. Did any of that come through for you in what we saw yesterday?
I mean, all of it comes through. I think that I want to say that what the committee laid out yesterday was just so clear and stark and grave, right? Like we for months now, we've had the Republicans lying to the American people, saying that this was a tour, that this was, regular political discourse. We actually saw the pictures of a gallows, right, with a noose on it. So when Representative Thompson is making that connection to racist violence, this is what this was. This was a thousands of people who believe Donald Trump's big lie, who also, believe in white supremacy, believe in patriarchy, and are about violence. And so when you're making these connections for the American people like they did so eloquently last night, there's no way that you don't connect those dots. And I think that that's the purpose of this committee, is to connect the dots for the American people, and also to let them know that this coup is not over. The insurrection on January 6th stopped, but the coup is continuing. And the fact is that you would not have all of these Republicans seeking pardons if they did not do something illegal. What would you need a pardon for if everything that you were doing was on the up and up?
Yeah, I know. It's exactly the point that I was making as well about Representative Perry. Why would you be seeking a pardon if you felt you did nothing wrong? Barbara, let me ask you about the kinds of conversations that might have been taking place this morning at the Department of Justice and in the office of Merrick Garland. What does this first hearing mean for Merrick Garland and the broader Justice Department? What does this do to their own January the 6th investigation? I would suspect that they're feeling a little bit of pressure this morning because of what was presented last night.
Well, to his credit, Merrick Garland has actually said he planned to watch as much of the hearings as he could. I could imagine an attorney general saying, that's all nonsense, that's all irrelevant, I'm tuning out the noise and I'm just focusing on my job. So, to his credit, he's interested in hearing information. We know they've asked for the transcripts of 1,000 witnesses, and the committee has said, not yet, but eventually we'll give that to you. So they're clearly interested in what the committee has to say. But of course, the jobs of the two entities are very different. The committee here is telling the story, documenting it for history, and identifying any gaps in the law where legislation might need to be enacted. The Justice Department's job, on the other hand, is to prosecute criminal offenses, violations of the law. Now, there is, though, some overlap. The lead counsel for the committee is a man named Tim Hafey. He's a former U.S. attorney from Virginia, really sharp guy, and I think his fingerprints are all over this. We saw him in some of those segments last night conducting some of the questioning in the video depositions. But they're very much putting this together in the elements that would be required to charge crimes, either conspiracy to defraud the United States or conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, or both. And so by putting those elements out there, kind of gift wrapping them, I think they are helping the Justice Department to see the path. I'm confident that the Justice Department will get there on their own anyway, but it doesn't hurt to get the leads that they're getting from the committee. And then as for pressure, I don't know that, they're under pressure all the time. As Janet Reno used to say, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't. So they might as well just do the right thing. And I think that's what they'll do here. Though, figuring that out will no doubt be a challenge.
All right, Taylor, I got to ask you really quickly about Liz Cheney. She definitely stood out last night, and perhaps because of the fact that she is such a prominent figure within, or was a prominent figure within the Republican establishment. She had this really powerful moment where she didn't just say that some of her Republican House colleagues sought pardons from Trump. She went a step further, talking about the insurrection. Watch this.
I say this to my Republican colleagues who are defending the indefensible. There will come a day when Donald Trump is gone, but your dishonor will remain.
Powerful words, lofty rhetoric. I mean, first of all, is it really right? I mean, how dishonored are Republicans if they are still running on the big lie and still likely to take back the House in November?
Well, that's part of the problem, is that there is no bottom now for these Republicans. I mean, the amount of hypocrisy coming from the party is astonishing at this point, from Kevin McCarthy on down, the people who are supposed to know better, the adults in the room. And the fact that that line, I think, will be a historic line when the history books are written concerning her. People will remember that. Those like myself who were part of the Republican Party for so long that left because of how debased the party became and because of how dishonest it is, that right there will always resonate with me. And I think that she knew what she was doing when she said that. And will it make a difference? Probably not. But when they sleep at night, when Kevin McCarthy and the rest of them that have been these absolute hypocrites concerning January 6th, knowing that they abdicated their oath of office, when they go to sleep at night, are they proud of themselves? I'm not so sure. But the point is that she's calling them out, and they have the receipts. We saw video footage of Kevin McCarthy's own staff running for their lives on January 6th. And we know she called out McCarthy for begging Donald Trump to do something that day, and he didn't because he was, quote, scared. And yet he still went and kissed the ring. So what does that say about them? It gives you no confidence whatsoever that today's Republican Party is capable of actually upholding their oaths of office to the Constitution, because they've demonstrated that fealty to Donald Trump and fealty to Trumpism is more important to them than our democracy. And they should pay a price for that.